Good evening and welcome to Meet the Candidates Night with the Cumberland Town Council candidates. This evening is meant to be an opportunity to help our residents learn more about the candidates on our upcoming municipal ballot. This is not meant to be a debate in any way, but more of an information to hear the candidates' views. Before we get started, I've just got a couple quick public service announcements, what I usually do. Election Day is Tuesday, June 8th. Polls open here at Town Hall at 7 a.m. and close at 8 p.m. I just want to emphasize this election will be at Town Hall, where our last two elections were at the high school. If interested in voting absentee, you can pick up your ballot or a ballot for a immediate family member here at Town Hall. If you want one mailed to you, you can contact the clerk's office at 829-5559, and they will mail one to your residence. So that's enough of my public service announcements and my introduction. I'm Chris Bolduc. I'm the Assistant Town Manager, and I'll be your official timekeeper for this evening. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator this evening, our Town Attorney, Alyssa Tibbetts.
Thank you, Chris. As Chris said, I'm Alyssa Tibbetts. I'm the town attorney with the law firm Jensen Baird. And I have had the distinct pleasure on several occasions over the past few years to moderate these forums, and very much enjoyed doing so, so I appreciate you having me back to do this again. I will give a very brief overview of the format of the panel this evening. As Chris indicated, this is intended to be a forum for discussion. I've prepared 6 questions for the candidates, and I will also ask the candidates to provide an opening and a closing statement. Each of the responses to the questions, as well as the opening and closing, will be 2 minutes in time, with as I understand it, a very obnoxious reminder at the end of the 2 minutes. So I think there's very little chance anyone will go over, as I've heard that tone before. This is for, just so everyone's aware, as Chris said, the election is June 8th. There are 3 seats for council. There are 2 seats with 2 incumbents who are running unopposed, and there is 1 seat for Cumberland Forsyth, which is a contested seat, and there are 2 candidates for that. So the candidates here on the dais are seated in alphabetical order by last name. The order of the openings and the questions will be in alphabetical order. Can you hear me at all? I'm sorry. Nothing? Is this any better? Oh, okay. I got to get that close. Okay, I'm sorry. Didn't realize I had to be that close. The candidates are seated in alphabetical order on the dais by last name. I will be asking them to provide opening statements beginning to my right and moving to my left, and then I will rotate the order through the questions as we go through. And with that, and I'm sorry you didn't hear the rest of it, but I don't want to take all of your time in repeating it all. I'll move on, and I will begin with opening remarks. We'll begin with Ron Kopp, and then we'll move to Mark Segrist, to Shirley Story King, and George Turner, and then I will call the questions and ask the questions, and we'll repeat or rotate the order from there. So, Ron, if you'd like to give a 2-minute opening statement, please do so.
All right. Thank you, Alyssa. My name's Ron Kopp, Jr. Closer? This was really close. I've lived in Cumberland my entire life. I am 6th generation of my family. I live and work in town. 15 years ago, I ran for town council along with 3 other people, and lo and behold, here I am still. So I do appreciate the support that I get from the community. I don't have an agenda. I do this because I like to be involved. I like to know what's going on. I think we live in a great town. I mean, as everybody knows, we live in the safest town in the state of Maine, and we live in the best educated town in the state of Maine. So that's something to be proud of, and I am proud of it. I live and work in town. I have my entire life. I'm self-employed. A lot of people know what I do. I have a lot of my clients, customers that live in town, and all of my business is repeat business. I'm true to my word. I always have been. I look forward to another 3 years on this council. I thoroughly enjoy the company of the council that we have. I think we have a wonderful town manager, and we have a wonderful town staff. Our police department in town here is second to none, and everybody knows that we have one of the greatest school systems in the state of Maine. In fact, I think the greatest school system in the state of Maine according to people. And it does cost us money. We have to pay for that school system, and it becomes a burden. But everything comes with a price, and I look forward to try to keep our seniors in town. That's one of our key things, and it's not easy, so. And I'm about out of time, so thank you.
Mark, please go ahead.
Thank you, Alyssa. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. I'm delighted to be here tonight. My name is Mark Segrist, and I live in Cumberland Fourside with my wife, Angela Stone, and our 2 sons, who are currently 6 and 4, the older of whom will actually be attending Mabel I. Wilson for first grade in the fall. Originally from a small town in western Nebraska, I spent the last decade or so of my life in Chicago, where I attended law school, I started my career, and I was fortunate enough to meet my wife, a Maine native, and start a family. Although our family story began in the Midwest, we always had our hearts set on raising our boys here in Maine, where they could explore forests, camp out, climb rocks, get muddy, and grow closer to their grandparents. A few years ago, we were fortunate enough to be able to purchase our dream home here in Cumberland and have never looked back. Since moving here, my family and I have loved exploring Maine and much of what Cumberland has to offer. My older son is learning to read and absolutely loves the story walk at the town forest. And my younger son adores animals and still talks about meeting the goats at the Sunflower Farm Creamery. This is clearly an idyllic town to live in and one in which I am honored to call home. However, Cumberland is changing, as are the wants and the needs of its citizens. Young families are moving into Cumberland in greater numbers and are looking to find a voice in the administration of town government that better reflects the needs of their growing families. And while I'm running for town council in part to help serve as that voice, I'm also running to ensure that we find a balance between preserving Cumberland's past and preparing for its future. I believe we can do this in several ways, including by welcoming more small businesses to help broaden our tax base and help alleviate financial pressure on our friends and neighbors, by protecting our environment and natural resources, including the preservation of open spaces and achieving carbon neutrality in the coming decades, and by better connecting, healing, and bringing together our community. Again, I'm delighted to be here tonight. I would be honored to serve as your town councilor, and I would humbly ask for your vote on June 8th. Thank you very much.
We almost got to hear the full tone in all its glory. Thank you. Shirley, please go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Shirley Story King. I haven't lived here quite as all of my life like Ron. I was 10 months old when I moved to Cumberland. My grandparents were living across the street, and my parents were building their house, so we were living in North Yarmouth for a short 10 months of my life. And while my family is only, 4 generations now, I'm part of the 3rd generation. I think we have as many in 3 generations as you have in your 6. I have 68 family members in town. I counted them today. 5 family businesses, 20 homes with permits drawn for 3 more being built this summer. So I'm very proud of my family. I'm very proud of my community. I ran 12 years ago, like Ron, because it was the thing to do. We have a family legacy of service to the community, and while my dad was on the town council for 30 years, or not just the town council, he was on the Board of Selectmen for 6 years and the council for 25 years. The legacy of public service includes volunteering at church, volunteering in the community, and generous donations within the community. And when you're a business in Cumberland, the same businesses get hit up to sponsor the field hockey team and the lacrosse team and the soccer team, and over and over. So I'm very proud of that. I have a master's in education. I taught at Greeley Middle School for 31 years, so the same number of years as I've been married to my husband. I retired last year in June, serendipitous time to retire, and I'm running out of time. I didn't think 2 minutes would go that fast. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Shirley. And George, please go ahead.
Thank you, Alyssa. I'm running for council for a simple reason that I love this town and I love the job. the job of the council is to designate policy appropriately. And I think two of the aspects of doing the job right are institutional memory and common sense. I've got a modicum of institutional memory since my wife and I came back here in 1977. I was on the Board of Appeals from 1980 to 2005, and I've been on the council ever since. The time that I spent on the Board of Appeals informed basically my abilities as far as the council's concerned in a unique way, in the sense that Board of Appeals basically is designed to support the ordinances, and you're there to uphold the ordinances, and you're also there to listen to appeals that come before the board. Over those years of 25 years, we approved an awful lot of questions to the validity, I will say, of the ordinance in terms of as it operated on a particular citizen. The bottom line is most of the time, our decisions were made based on the idea, did it injure one of the neighbors, whatever this person who wanted the variance was asking. At any rate, I think that prepared me for the council very well.
Thank you, George, and thanks to all of you for your opening remarks. We'll move to the prepared questions. So the first question, we'll start with Mark, and I'm happy to repeat it for each of you. I'll ask you as we go along, but we'll move in order. So the first question is, how would you, as a counselor, balance the often competing considerations of providing municipal services with controlling property tax increases?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, as public servants and as stewards of public resources, we have an obligation to the folks in Cumberland to produce a budget that has the lowest possible tax rate, while also at the same time providing the highest level of services to our residents. And the issue of property taxes is one that, if I'm being honest, is one of the reasons that I started running for town council to begin with. I've knocked on quite a few doors over the last several months here, and I've spoke with many residents who are struggling to pay their property taxes. And while they go towards funding essential services for the town, because I believe the services that we do provide are wonderful, it's a real issue. I was surprised in 2020 when I looked at the financial statements of the town to see that 75% of our town's revenue comes from residential property taxes. And when I first read that number, I thought to myself, gosh, that seems a little high. And so I benchmarked that off of other nearby towns, such as Falmouth and Yarmouth, and I realized that they were in the mid-60s or even high 50s in terms of their percentages. And so what that told me was that we rely in Cumberland much more heavily on the taxation of residential property than do other nearby towns. And I think that makes sense because these other towns don't have the same robust commercial bases, or we don't have the same robust commercial bases as these other towns, I should say. And while I'm not saying that we should have the exact same commercial bases as these towns, I do think that we can do a better job of identifying areas that are currently zoned for business, mostly on the Route 100 corridor and Route 1, and working with those landowners, identifying what types of businesses people would like to see here in town, which would help broaden the tax base and hopefully lower property taxes for everyone. I think just by doing that, broadening that base and giving people some relief in terms of not everything is falling on their shoulders, we would be able to talk about other areas that we would like to invest those funds. I think one of the issues that people run into is they're focused just so much on cutting expenses for the school. I do not think that's the right approach here.
Great, thank you very much. Shirley, would you like me to repeat the question?
I think I got it, Alyssa.
Okay,
Thank
great,
you.
go ahead, thank you.
So when I joined the town council 5 terms ago, our commercial tax base was around 2.5%, and it's now up around 12%. So we have been making some progress in that direction, moving trying to broaden the tax base. But as Mark said, it's been challenging. One of the things that made it challenging was accepting residential houses in places where no commercial development was happening. An example would be Route 1 with the apartments and the houses there. And now when we get a proposal for development in the adjacent lot, we get a lot of kickback from those residents about what should go in there and what shouldn't go in there. So that's been sort of a double-edged sword. We have more homes for working force people, workforce homes, but we have restricted our ability to have more commercial property. I think the only way to control property tax increases is to control spending. And sometimes we have to look at what do we need to have versus what is nice to have. Putting pavement on roads is not glamorous, but it's a need, and our roads are deteriorating quickly. Well, I can't say that we've spent any money in a luxurious kind of way lately, especially. But I'll just use, I hate to do this, but I think the school is looking at putting in a turf field. Is that a nice to have or is that a need to have? And since 70% of property taxes go toward school funding, that's something that citizens will have to decide. I think we on the town council do a great job at controlling spending.
Great. Thank you. George, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I think I understand the question.
Thank you. Go ahead.
And it's a difficult question, and it's an impossible question to answer in the short run. The fact of the matter is, through most of 2005 to 2010 or 12, the council kept taxes at near zero. And the school basically was probably 2 or 3% on a lot of those years going up. And part of the motivation for the council to keep the taxes at zero was exactly because we were concerned that the overall tax to the average person in Cumberland was going to be more than they would want to shoulder. We obviously need more business in town. We need more on the Route 1 corridor and on Route 100. But it would be unfair to suggest that by keeping our expenses at a low ebb, that we were going to solve the problem. The truth is, taxes, if we keep services at the level that the people of Cumberland want, are going to gradually go up. For us to tell the public anything different would be anything but fair. We've got to find some way on a statewide basis to readjust this dependence on property taxes. It's just not fair, and it's going to get worse before it gets better because we're a desirable town. On some level, there's actually been a publication out there that suggests that Cumberland is the most livable town in the United States. And that very well may be true, but for it to remain so, we know that people are moving out of the cities and moving closer to the suburbs, and they're coming to desirable areas like Cumberland. We're going to have more residential housing, and we can't avoid that, so we have to be realistic.
Thank you, George. And finally, Ron, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I'm
Okay,
fine.
thank you. Go ahead.
Back when I first came on the council, the town of Cumberland was 2.5 to 3% commercial. I think we are up around 14% now. I don't even know the exact number, but it's still very minimal. I would welcome commercial growth, and we have tried and tried and tried to attract commercial growth in this town, and we've done pretty well on Route 1. Route 100 has stayed pretty stagnant. We've had a couple of small businesses appear, but it's very hard to attract commercial business. Since we've been on the council, I mean, we have never seen an increase in taxes more than 2.5%, and I think that was once. We've kept it at zero a good many years, so I think we've been pretty frugal that way. Town staff has been cut by 1/3 in the 15 years that I've been on this council. We have done more with less people in this building right here that we're sitting in. And it has been very tough because we've had to make some very tough decisions on letting some good people go. It wasn't very easy. I mean, we've done this several times. And George is right. We're a very desirable community for people to want to move into. And it's nothing. I think the normal house in the town of Cumberland right now is $545,000. I mean, to me, that's a lot of money. And we are a desirable community. We're a victim of our own circumstances. I mean, we've got a great school department. We've got a great town staff, and it's just very desirable. But it's not a real desirable commercial business district because we're halfway between Lewis and halfway between Portland. I would love to see more commercial development on Route 100 only because I own some land up there. I mean, and I've paid taxes on it for 40 years and it sits there vacant. But it just hasn't been the big push for commercial development.
Great, thank you all. We'll move on to question 2, and we'll start with Shirley. And the question is, do you believe that there is a lack of affordable housing in Cumberland? And if so, what would you as a town councillor do to address that?
Wow. I do believe that housing costs in Cumberland are through the roof, and I worry about that. I worry about that sincerely. I know that most of us could not buy our homes again, given the price that they're valued at, and that's upsetting to me. I know that there are a lot of teachers in the school district who would like to live in town but can't afford to live in town because the price of housing is so high. I know that it's going to become even more challenging for workforce housing, as we already are looking at record low unemployment numbers. Where's our workforce? Where are our police officers going to live? Where are our firefighters going to live? So I do think that there is a shortage of affordable housing in the community. And one thing I think that has helped us with our values around housing is the new conservation subdivision project. I think to be able to cluster homes in such a way as to maintain some open space may help developers build homes that are more reasonably priced. But that's a brand new ordinance, and it's just being tried out for the first time right now. It's a tough question. I think it's a Maine question. I know that there's a shortage of affordable housing in Portland. And one of the things being proposed on Route 1 is a 50-unit apartment building. That's going in to the planning board at their next meeting. I don't know if that will go or not. I'm not sure. I think people want homes, and I think they need to have a willingness to move into different kinds of housing.
Great, thank you. George, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, that's fine.
Thank you.
I've been in the real estate business for over 40 years in this area. And I was involved a number of years ago with a housing development near Ron Kopp's business up off Route 100. It's kind of a microcosm of part of the problem. Probably 10, 12 years ago, houses were built on a 40-acre parcel. They were affordable housing because the council had designated it so. And the problem had been that it had been commercial property, but we couldn't get any commercial development to happen there. And it took 5 years, and we still hadn't had any commercial interest, except once in a while a bank would think maybe they'd do something, then didn't. So we ended up approving affordable housing there. The affordable housing, and that's a number of years ago, was a couple of $100,000. The first couple of houses in that development sold for $195 or so. A few years later, those same houses were selling for $350,000. They now sell for $400,000, $400,000 and a quarter. It's a difficult problem, and I don't quite agree with Shirley about the conservation developments, simply because I think we need the conservation developments, and I think we've done a good job of coming up with a viable ability to retain trails, et cetera, in town. But as far as creating affordable housing is concerned, a 2 or 3 acre lot and a half-acre lot, there isn't much difference in value based on the craziness that's going on in terms of these values. We've got prices of houses going for 20, 30% more than the asking price a few days after they're listed. It's not realistic to think outside the box to expect to have affordable housing in Cumberland anymore.
Thank you, George. And I'll just put the standing offer to repeat the questions. I won't ask anymore. You all can let me know if you need it, but the offer is on the table. Ron?
I think the problem with affordable housing in the town of Cumberland is there's no affordable land in the town of Cumberland. You can't build a $200,000 house on a $150,000 lot and have an affordable product when you're done. George hit it right on the head. The development down below my shop on Route 100, when those homes first sold, I don't think they could exceed $230,000. And here we are 4 or 5 years later, and one of them just a couple of weeks ago sold for over $400,000. They were affordable to the first-time buyer, but that was it. Same thing down here where the town manager lives. I mean, that was an affordable project when it started, and now it's gone the other way. I would love to see affordable housing in this town, but the problem that we have is our land values. I mean, look around. I mean, there are vacant lots in this town that are selling for $200,000 right now, just for raw land. And that's a problem. And there are people that would love to move into this community, that would love to get their kids into the school system, but they just cannot afford to spend $450,000 or $550,000 for a home. I don't know the answer. I guess if I did, I'd have a crystal ball and we'd all be a lot better off. But I really don't know. I mean, and I think the problem is we're such a desirable community. People are scoffing these houses up 1 or 2 days on the market, and they're selling for $30,000 and $40,000 more than asking price. And, you know, I put myself in the same situation. I know what I have in my home, and I know what it's worth. I'm not going to give it away to a family that I would love to see move into town because I can't afford to. And where am I going to go? I mean, I could move to Aroostook County, but I don't want to do that. And even that is getting really, there's a lot of people up there now. So I don't know the answer. I wish I did.
Thank you, Ron. Mark?
Yeah, thank you. I think Shirley hit the nail on the head. Anyone who's looked online at the value of their own home or is trying to sell a home or is potentially trying to buy a home, you realize a couple things really quickly. Number one, there's only a few houses that are for sale in Cumberland right now, and that the value of your home has probably skyrocketed since you bought it. And so that might be nice if you're trying to sell and cash out and move to some other less expensive community. But it raises a serious issue for families that are trying to move into Cumberland, first-time home buyers, as Ron mentioned as well, trying to move into town, as well as for families that are trying to maintain and stay in their homes. There's a lot of families that I've spoken with over the last several months that either did not move to Cumberland, did not purchase a home here because the cost of living was so high, or frankly the cost of the taxes that are rolled into the cost of home ownership here in Cumberland was so high, or they just decided to not move to Cumberland altogether. And so that's unfortunate to me because we've lost those families to Cumberland. We've lost their contributions of what they might bring. I've also spoken with older residents who say they're concerned that they live on a fixed income, and while the value of their house is going up, it's nice, the taxes are also going up as a result, and they're concerned that if they are forced to sell or downsize at some point, then they might not be able to repurchase back in the town that they call home. So right now, the average sales home price in Cumberland is about $545,000, as Ron mentioned. In Maine, statewide, it's about $270,000. And so clearly we are going to have more expensive houses than statewide as an average. But I think we need to try to explore new and creative opportunities to try to keep housing affordable here in Cumberland. I don't know what that might be. But it really comes down to this question of, do we want to live in a town that makes itself available to folks from all walks of life to be able to call it home here? And I personally think the answer to that question is yes, and I think we all need to work together to try to figure out some solutions. Again, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I think it's critical that we do that.
Great, thank you. And thank you all. The third question, we'll start with George. And the question is, do you believe the town should continue its efforts to increase its non-residential tax base? And if so, what is your vision for economic development within the town of Cumberland?
Thank you, Alyssa. That question sort of dovetails into a couple of the other questions. Again, there's only, as Ron pointed out, there's only so much commercial land in town. And the only real solution I see is increasing the amount of commercial property. And we have Route 1 and Route 100, we keep repeating that. But we need to think outside the box and maybe find some ways to actually zone some further land and zone it commercial. But we're not going to stop this inflow of new families, young families, and we don't want to. We want to be a welcoming community, and we are a welcoming community despite some of the goings-on that we've had locally lately. The council, over a period of years, and I've watched it for 40 years since I was on the Board of Appeals, has made good decisions for this town consistently. And the motivation for making those decisions has been consistent town councilors whose desire is to do the best they can for the citizens of Cumberland. And I take my hat off to previous people because we owe a lot. This council, that basically 3 of us have been here since 2005, owes a lot to previous councils. The town is a desirable place to live because of the fact that good decisions have been made over a period of years. We're on the verge right now of perhaps being in a position to ease the tensions as far as some of these problems with people criticizing the school and so on. And as somebody said, the school system is the best in the state.
Thank you, George. Ron?
Can you repeat the question also?
Finally, thank you.
I was gonna-
Do you believe the town should continue its efforts to increase its non-residential tax base? And if so, what is your vision for economic development within the town of Cumberland?
Absolutely, I do. We have struggled attracting commercial businesses, Route 100 and Route 1 as well. We have brought in some wonderful businesses on Route 1 over the years with some attractive buildings. Our goals were to bring businesses into this town that would hire town residents, and we've done that down there. I mean, and there are some beautiful buildings down there on Route 1. Route 100 has fallen behind, and Route 1 has been pretty desirable to some really high-tech businesses. And there are a few of residents that live down there. I mean, and it's great to live and work in the community that you can live in. You know, we don't want people to have to commute to Brunswick or to Portland. It would be wonderful if people could just drive to Route 1 or drive to Route 100 to go to work, to make your money and spend your money in the town of Cumberland. I mean, we've had Walmart, we've had all kinds of numerous big box stores that we said thanks, but no thanks. We would rather have the places like CFAX, the big business right there at the end of Tuttle Road. I forget their name now. I mean, I think that they have 84 employees there now, and that's what we are looking for. The town manager's had some really good foresight on what's happened down there on Route 1, and he's done a wonderful job, as well as the council, too. And there's still more on the horizon. I mean, the new doctor's office down there on Route 1 is a beautiful building, and I think he has 2 tenants in there with him now, and that's what we're looking for. I would love to see more commercial businesses. It's just been very, very slow coming. I mean, and we do need to do something to offset the tax rate for our citizens. And believe me, we have struggled and struggled and struggled, and it hasn't been easy. But, you know, we've gone from 2% to 12 or 14, so it's been a long road. But I don't know how long it would take to get to 50, but it probably won't be in my lifetime. But
Great. Thank you, Ron. And Mark?
Thank you very much. Absolutely, it would be my answer to that. Again, one of the reasons I'm running for town council is to see that we actively re-engage that issue. I know there has been work in the past. I've spoken very closely with the town manager and other folks that are on the council about some of the efforts in the past. I think we should encourage those. We have great resources here in terms of the town, in terms of sending out information from the Cumberland Crier. I would love to see another survey to go out to folks, 3,000 or 4,000 people here in town, and ask them what types of businesses, if any, they would like to see here. Those could be on Route 100, those could be on Route 1, some could even be on Main Street. Again, very different types of businesses I would envision. But I think we owe that to the citizens to ask them what types of businesses they would want, learn about that, and then go to those landowners, because this land on Route 100 or on Route 1, it's not owned by the town, it's owned by private landowners. And so it needs to be obviously in their best interest as well to incentivize some type of business to come here, and it has to be in their best interest to even come. But I think we owe it to re-energize that effort. We owe it to, frankly, everyone in the town. There's a lot of folks who don't send their kids to public schools, and I've knocked on quite a few doors here in town over the last several months. And I hear that from a lot of people. They say, well, you know what, I don't send my kids to the school, or I don't use this service, but I'm paying this much in property taxes and I'm frustrated by it. And while I generally believe that the taxes are going towards good social services, I hear their concern, and I do think we owe it to them to try to find alternative means of revenue. Again, I really want to direct people away from this idea of let's cut this or let's cut this. I think the council has done a really good job of maintaining spending. I think we need to think about it differently, and we need to start thinking about how do we achieve revenue from alternative means. I think a perfect example is every single day I get in my car, and my family and I, we drive to another town, and we end up stimulating that town's economy. We should be putting those funds right back here in Cumberland where we can.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And Shirley.
Thank you, Alyssa. Well, one thing the pandemic has showed us is that our economy is changing. We have fewer and fewer people commuting to the big cities and more people working from home. And I think the areas that we could help stimulate the economy for Cumberland is looking at what are our needs. We have one place where we can put, well, maybe two places, I guess. We gave a tax incentive to a memory care facility, but we don't have any nursing care facilities within our community. And I know that is something I would really like to see. On the other hand, they don't make great amounts of money. So it's more of a service than it is an assistance to the economy. But there are other service industry sectors that could help us. I would love to see maybe a restaurant or two on Route 1. You have to go to Falmouth, and we tried to order from the Forside Tavern on Saturday night, something we've been trying to do Saturday night since the pandemic hit, to order from local restaurants. Takeout, and they were so busy they weren't doing any takeout orders. So there's clearly a need for more of that type of service. I think another area to look at would be the tech industry, and I think we have, some of that going on right now on the corner of Route 1 and Tuttle Road. We have they're a precision company, and I'm drawing a blank on their name, but they're a high-tech industry that measures testing kits for labs to make sure they're all standards, Maine Standards, that's who it was. It's not Maine Standards anymore, but that kind of tech industry would be a nice addition to our community.
Great. Thank you, Shirley. So that brings us to question 4, and we'll start with Ron. And the question is, do you believe the town council should play a role in social issues within the community involving equity and diversity? And if so, what do you believe that role should be?
That's a loaded question. I think half the problem is everybody on these social media, and nobody wants to go talk to anybody anymore. It's too easy to sit there and push the button, and they don't want to talk face to face. I don't think that that's right. I want somebody to come see me if they have a problem with something that I do. I want it to be personable. I don't think it's right when somebody sends somebody an email downgrading somebody else. I think that's the problem that we're in right now, and it has been for the last year. I don't have a Facebook account. I don't like it. I don't think it's anybody else's business what I do in my spare time, nor do I look at what anybody else does. Social media has taken over like you wouldn't believe, and I blame a lot of it on the pandemic because a lot of people are sitting home and they don't have anything to do. But I do not think it's the town council's place to get in anybody's business in that direction. Social media is a good thing. I mean, it's good that we can broadcast and people can see us from home, but I think that's where it should stop. I mean, I really do. I mean, the whole dilemma with the school board and everything that's going on in town has really brought this town down. It really is. It's degrading. It's not the town that I grew up in, nor do I want it to keep going that way. I'm really disgusted with the way we're going right now. I am truly worried what's going to happen with my grandchildren in this community. I mean, I have grandchildren that live in this town. I have some that live in Wyndham, and I have some that live in Pownell. My grandson that lives in Pownell doesn't even know the pandemic's going on because they've gone to school 5 days a week. Never have they missed a day of school because he's in a very small school. And they don't see what we're seeing here in this town.
Thank you, Ron. Mark?
Thank you. I guess to answer the question, yes, I do think the town council can play a role. Not in terms of getting in terms of other people's business, but in terms of what the town council's business is, which is passing ordinances and local laws. So I come at this issue of inclusion and diversity from kind of two different perspectives. The first just being a fellow human being, and it breaks my heart when I feel that people are being treated unfairly, unequitably, especially if that inequity is being created by some town ordinance or law, which I'm not saying it necessarily is in Cumberland. But I also come at it as an attorney. Like the U.S. Constitution, the main Constitution, under which we all are falling and operating at this point, promises that we are all equal under the law, regardless of our race, religion, or tribal origin. But if you've been watching the news lately or you've been following on Facebook, like Ron just mentioned, you can see that this promise is not always being bared out for everyone. Undeniable racial disparities exist, in my opinion, across the country in terms of education, housing, income, healthcare, and criminal justice. And the laws and government programs that sometimes aim to be race neutral can often make the situation worse. So where do I think the town council can play a role? I believe strongly that Cumberland, like any municipality across the country, has a key role to play in terms of fostering and ensuring racial equity with respect to the ordinances it passes and their effects, if any, on people of color living within our community. And so the place that I think we should start is by identifying the racial impact of any new laws or existing ordinances here in town, and that's a good place to start.
Thank you. And Shirley?
Thank you, Alyssa. And I think I'll just pick up where Mark left off, starting with the roles of the community. I think we are beginning to look at our ordinances and our policies, our hiring policies. I think that's important to do. I'm distracted, sorry. I do think the town has a responsibility to make sure that we give equal access to qualified people for employment. I think I agree, well, I know I agree with Ron as far as face-to-face communication. I'm going to back up a little bit. My oldest son has special needs, and he's about to turn 30, and I've been on this journey against bias and discrimination for 3 decades. And one of the things I learned early on in some graduate classes that I took was to use people-first language. And one of the problems with theory education, so critical race theory, fat theory, gender theory, is that it lumps people into groups. And that's what Facebook and social media is doing. It's lumping people into groups, and it's not looking at people as individuals And I'd like to see a way that our community can get back somehow to looking at people as individuals. Allison had the idea of having council members at the farmer's market. I've signed up, Ron signed up, Allison signed up, no, Georgia signed up, just to start having those face-to-face conversations. I think it's very important that we treat others with kindness and respect, whether we agree or disagree with what they have to say.
Thank you, Shirley. And George?
Sorry, Shirley. George, you need to just get closer to the mic. They can't hear you on the TV.
I agree with virtually everything Shirley just said. However, specifically, the council observed the goings-on as far as the school board is concerned and the problems of communication between various people, including the individual who pushes the First Amendment to the point where, you know, when you pound the drum too many times, nobody can hear you anymore. And early on, the council, to be honest, wanted to stay out of the situation. The town council's policies are designed for the safety and welfare of the town, and you can kind of interpolate that maybe to reach out toward the schools. But the fact is, the problems that began to arise really were the school's problems. And initially, we had almost an unwritten pact that we were going to stay out of it. Then we came to the idea that we would put out an equity letter, which was my understanding of the equity letter was that it would engender the idea of equal treatment, everything everybody has said, and looking level. I had the opportunity at one point in a council meeting to say that I was brought up to look level, neither up nor down at anybody. Somebody piped up in the back of the room and said, "That's not good enough." Well, as far as I'm concerned, it is good enough. And when we did that equity letter, it was a gradual, potentially foot in the door to go ahead and go through some other things. And the training sessions that we've agreed to now at this point are going to be useful. There's no question about that. But I just don't like the idea that we imply that there's something wrong with our ordinances or that we've ever passed anything that wasn't gender neutral and racially neutral in this town. That isn't the problem this town has.
Thank you, George. That brings us to question 5, and we'll start with Mark. Do you think that the existing governing documents of the town, including the comprehensive plan and the town charter, are serving the community well? If not, what changes would you make?
Yes, I think they are serving the town well. I know a lot of people are sometimes confused. Like I mentioned, I've spoken with quite a few residents here, pretty decent sampling of the town, and there are certain people who are still confused that there's a separate town council and there's a separate school board. I think this was one of the issues that came up in last year's debates that I think was highlighted by some current council members. So I am happy with the way that they are currently operating. I think the school board does its thing and manages its business, and the town council manages its business. The comprehensive plan, I think, is fantastic. Honestly, when I first decided that I wanted to run for town council, it started by delving deep into those comprehensive plans. So I've read the 2009 plan. I've also read the 2014 plan. I understand that based on charter or some internal ordinance, we're required to do that every 10 years. And so we should be coming up on the next update period for that plan. I would be proud to be part of that, because I do think that that really paints the picture not only from where we are in terms of growth, in terms of taxes, in terms of the environment, but also really where we want to go. So I think my answer would be a short no. I think the founding documents of the town are working well. But we do, I think, in terms of the school board and the council, I think we can actually play a little bit more closer role to one another. I am actually an advocate for having some type of joint standing committee, if we can, between the town council and the school board, so there's better communication and there's direct lines of communication between the two groups, in the hopes of trying to communicate better in terms of future growth for the town, better planning, and more open and honest dialogue, so that we have, I guess, unified instructions and marching orders, if you will, to the folks of Cumberland. So that's the only thing that I would add there.
Great, thank you, Mark. Shirley?
I would agree with what's been said so far. I think our documents are outstanding to date. If you look at our charter, there's been very little change to our charter since it was written over 40 years ago. We still have 7 planning board members. We still have a nominations committee. I was just kind of reviewing the history of the town of Cumberland today, thinking, wow, the people that wrote these documents really had a vision for our community. And then I was had a little proud moment because my dad was one of those people. The comprehensive plan, George and I we both sat on that. Mr. Vale was the vice chair of the comprehensive plan committee. What an incredible working group of people, very thoughtful. No stone was left unturned as far as what we want for our community, and what people want for our community continues to be the same thing. We want to have that rural character, that feel that we're in a town. And so I think our work with our lands and conservation, our joint efforts with the Sheboygan Cumberland Land Trust have all been working in that direction. I would like to see more people engage in our community government. And I'll step on a soapbox for 30 seconds, and I would teach this in my humanities class, but only 40% of the world gets to choose its leaders, and we are part of that 40%. And so when we start complaining about the government, we have to realize the government is us. And so I would like to see another big, robust, comprehensive plan committee. We had, I don't know, close to 20 people on that committee, and I thought we were never going to get anything done, and it took 2 years to write it, but it was, the process was fantastic.
Thank you, Shirley. George?
I think the documents of the town are amazing. The comprehensive plan committee was amazing. We have the luxury, along with being one of the richest towns in the state, we have the luxury of having a lot of the brightest people in the state, in this town. And I'm amazed at the level of volunteerism that does happen. We have great people on all of our committees, and we never have a shortage. When we need somebody to fill in, we'll have 3 or 4 applications. The only caveat I have to the whole idea that our documents are perfect is my prejudice against being too specific. I think when you look back with the 40 years I look back, and I look at what we had for documents in 1980 and what we have now, the specificity for everybody is incredible. I mean, people can be going about their business at home and do something and be totally oblivious to the fact that they owe a fee for it. I think the fact that we have as good documentation as we do is a two-edged sword. The fact of the matter is, maybe if things were a little less explicit and left a little more freedom, we wouldn't have as much cost to government, and maybe government would help us get taxes down a little. But the long and the short of it is that we have an amazing town, and our problems are really pretty minor.
Thank you,
That's all I
George.
got.
Sorry. Thank you, George. Ron?
Thank you. Our comprehensive plan is a 10-year plan. I think the last one took us 11 to 12 years, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, it was a tremendous amount of work by a tremendous amount of people. And there's a lot of nights that people spent here talking about things when they could have been watching their grandsons play baseball or something. But this town is all about volunteerism. It's a great committee that came up with a bunch of great documents. And it's basically a roadmap or a guidance to where we want to be in the future. And I think they've done a tremendous job. George and I are on the appointments committee, and this town has more people that are willing to step up to the plate to be on different committees than anybody I've ever seen. We've interviewed 12 people for 2 positions before, George. I mean, it's been it's been remarkable on the volunteerism in this community. I think things are changing, and I think the next comprehensive plan is going to be a lot different than the last one because we're heading in different directions. I think Mark made the comment that the school and the town need to collaborate a little more, be a little more vocal, talk to each other. I don't think that's happening right now, and I don't think it would hurt. I mean, they do their thing and we do our thing. They send us a bill at the end of the year and we send them a check. I mean, there should be a little bit more give and take, a little bit more conversation about what's going on between the two. I mean, we're all in the same town. We all live in the same community. They're educating our children and our grandchildren, and we're all paying for it. They're doing a good job. We pay for it. But there isn't much give and take. There needs to be more conversations over that. And I think it's a good document, and I think the next one will be a lot different than the last one, so.
Thank you, Ron. And that takes us to our final question before closing statements. We'll start with Shirley. The question is, what do you believe are the most important environmental issues facing the town, and what can the town council do to address those issues?
Thank you, Alyssa. I think we've already made some steps by putting a solar field on our landfill that will provide electricity for all our municipal buildings when, well, it is already, but it's privately owned, and there's a purchase plan to buy it back from the company that built it. I think we changed some ordinances to make it easier to put a solar panel on your home. Just recently, we allowed them to be as close to a property line as a shed. Prior to that, you had to be 25 feet away from a property line, and that might not have afforded you enough space for solar power on your property. I think the faster we get to carbon neutral, the better that will be. We have two electric vehicles in the community. One's being used by the police department and one's being used by town staff. I think the technology is still something to be improved upon. I understand one of the cars isn't always running. But I have faith that we will get there. I think a lot of our responsibility as far as the environment comes in listening to policies, listening to good science, looking at both sides of situations. The whole Clean Energy Connect thing has highlighted that for me, just trying to, I'm undecided, truly, about its impact. I think I'm for it, and then I listen to people that I think are, hunters and people who use the land and who don't want it, and I'm surprised. Like, I know deer like low vegetation to eat, and I think they like to eat on power lines, so it's a balancing act. But I'm proud of the work we've done so far. I think we're ahead of the curve.
Thank you, Shirley. George?
Well, again, there's nothing to disagree with what Shirley said. I would add, we all know the temperature of the bay is rising rapidly out here, and it's going to have its effects on the environment to a large extent, and what we can do about it, I really don't know. We have the problem, the overriding problem we have, I think, right now is invasives, plants that basically take over. And we've had a wonderful committee that's been trying to deal with that problem, but they acknowledge that certain invasive species, as much as we can hire out people to attempt to eradicate the species, it's not going away, and it just keeps coming back. And we're further and further behind, whereas other invasives have been controlled to some extent. I think as far as solar is concerned, I was tempted by a biologist in town here who also is into the solar industry to put solar panels on our house, and my wife would go along with that, I think, as long as we weren't too deprived in other areas. But the fact of the matter is, Central Maine Power keeps, basically, we keep being sent these invitations to have 15% taken off your electric bill if you share in solar farms that are large farms. And we've had a proposal here in West Cumberland where there was an attempt to put a solar farm there. But, so I don't know what else to do, to be honest.
Thank you, George. Ron?
What I'd like to say is COVID, but that's not really an environmental issue, so. The solar is here to stay, there's no question about it. The solar farm that's to my right now is producing enough electricity to power this building, the Public Works building, and I believe the library, Chris, if I'm not mistaken. And it's growing in leaps and bounds. I mean, they now have shingles that have solar panels in them. They now have vinyl siding that have solar panels in them. And I think that this is just, it's going to explode in the next 5 years. I mean, one of the biggest things that I think are the greatest asset that's happened in this town is town water in the West End. It's been a huge, huge thing. And I think it would be wonderful if we could just supply the whole town with town water. And I think that will happen eventually. But we had some contaminated wells in the West End years ago, and they've tested them now, and they seem to be clear. But town water is a huge asset, not only for fire protection, but, you know, when you lose your electricity, you still have town water. And that's just a great thing. One of the biggest things that I see are electric vehicles. They are coming in leaps and bounds. And I mean, every day technology is changing on those. I'm in the automobile business, and every day there's something new coming out. Tesla, General Motors, they're going to be the leaders in this group in the next few years. Tesla already is now. There's going to be an issue there because they're not paying the gas tax, which is repairing our roads. That's a lot of money. So there's going to be some issues with these electric vehicles, but the offset will, they'll correct that. There'll be a tax of some type. Obviously, government knows how to do that. But I think we're headed in the right direction. I think with our solar farm and what we've done, I think we're headed in the right direction, so.
Thank you, Ron. And Mark?
Thank you. When I think of the environment here in Cumberland, I think about things like invasive species, like George mentioned. I also think about things like water, like Ron mentioned. But my mind always wanders towards the issue of climate change. As we all know, climate change poses a very serious and potentially existential threat to life as we know it, I will say, on this planet, as well as right here in Maine. George mentioned the warming of the bay here. A 2019 study confirmed that the Gulf of Maine is actually the fastest warming body of water on the Earth. And in the last 100 years alone, and this comes from the comprehensive plan, which I was happy to read, temperatures have risen. I'm actually not happy to read this, but I was happy to find it in the comprehensive plan. Temperatures have risen by 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit over the last 100 years, and sea levels have risen 9 inches here in Maine. And so that's why I was very happy in 2015 when the Lands and Conservation Commission's Climate Action Plan Subcommittee conducted a baseline analysis to try to figure out how much in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, how much in terms of CO2 is the town of Cumberland actually emitting into the atmosphere every year. And so that 2015 baseline was conducted, and they found that about 66,000 metric tons of CO2 was the answer. And so thankfully the town council and others have taken really meaningful actions, I think, since that time, to help limit the amount of carbon emissions going into the atmosphere by 25%, but we have a lot of work to do. I am proud to serve on the Lands and Conservation Commission's Climate Action Plan Subcommittee, and I was very proud to be able to speak in front of the town council here several weeks ago about the Climate Action Plan, the goal of which is to have the town government and MSAD 51 be carbon neutral by 2030. And we can do this through building new buildings to net carbon zero standards, utilizing solar, utilizing industrial scale heat pumps, electric vehicles, and things of that nature. But I think by working together, we can accomplish this goal, and we can do our part to help mitigate that issue.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And thank you all for entertaining all of these questions and your thoughtful answers. We're now at a point of closing statements. This, like the introductory statements, this will be 2 minutes each, and we will begin with George.
Thank you, Alyssa. And thank you to everyone who's been willing to listen to this presentation by everybody. And I'm very proud of the fact that all of the candidates are more than adequate to the task. I would suggest that I would love to see a vote of the town that is more than the typical June vote. I'd like to see 3/4 at least of the voters vote on this go-round, because it will signify a real democratic response. Too often we get 20% of the voting public voting in off years, and it's a distortion, in my view, of what really should be. So everybody get out and vote, and appreciate the fact that the right to vote is one of the most sacred rights we have in this country. I'm just happy to be part of the mix here, and I'm happy to have had the last 40 years, including 25 on the appeals board and 15, 16 years here on the council, to do what I could to do my part as far as making good decisions for the town. So I will appreciate anybody's vote, but whether you're going to vote for me or for anybody else, please vote. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Ron.
Thank you. I've lived in this town my entire life. I have no plans on going anywhere. When I leave, it'll be in a black bag with a zipper. My house is paid for. I thoroughly enjoy living in this town. It was a long haul. When I first built my house 35 years ago, I said, I'll never live long enough to pay for this house. And I mean, you know, I never had a mortgage. I never had anything that was financed for 20 years in my life. And I said to my wife, I said, how are we ever going to do this? And lo and behold, we did it. I'm very comfortable in this town. I thoroughly enjoy this town. I've raised 3 boys that went through the school system in this town. And some of my grandchildren live in this town now, along with my youngest son. I never had an agenda when I joined the council 15 years ago, and I still don't. I do this for the greater good of the community. I am very, very proud of where I live and what I do in my business in this town of Cumberland. I know a lot of people in this town. A lot of my friends have passed away. I mean, a lot of my customers have passed over the years. A lot of my customers are repeat customers that have gone from generation to generation. I'm not going to go anywhere, and I'm looking for the greater good of this community. I want my kids to succeed in this community. I think it's a wonderful place to live. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else, and I hope my family continues on in this community. I mean, I wish I knew how many of us there were that lived in Cumberland, but it's got to be very close to the stories. I mean, and I grew up here. My father and my mother grew up here. My grandfather and my great-grandfather before, and I hope to carry on the tradition, but I would appreciate everybody's vote on June 8th. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Mark.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to be here tonight. After knocking on over 1,000 doors here in Cumberland over the last several weeks, I've had the pleasure of meeting families who've been in Cumberland for 5 generations, as well as those who just moved here 5 months ago. And while each family might have a slightly different reason for calling Cumberland home, I can tell you that they all have one thing in common. They all want to know that the town that they live in is being run by good, honest, and decent people, and that their needs, not the needs of the council, are being put first and prioritized. Tonight we've touched on quite a few important topics to the town, such as the balancing of growth and conservation, how to slow or mitigate the increasing burden of residential property taxes, equity and diversity inclusion, as well as the environment. And while I can't promise to be an expert on any one of these issues, what I can promise you is this. As your town councilor, I will always make sure to listen to you and to put your priorities first, to be open, transparent, and honest with you about the critical issues facing our town, and to work with everyone, regardless of political affiliation, on the basis of mutual decency and respect. So thank you, moderator. Thank you, fellow candidates, for the thoughtful and respectful sharing of ideas here tonight. Again, I would be honored to serve as your town councilor, and I would humbly ask for your vote on June 8th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. And Shirley.
I get to wrap it up. So I would just like to echo the sentiments expressed by others that it is an honor to serve on the Cumberland Town Council. I've spoken about family, yet when I spoke with my sister the other evening about running for town council, she said she's not voting for me because I can't vote for her because every time something for the family comes up, I have to recuse myself. That being said, I feel that Cumberland has a whole lot of families that are very connected. There's going to be a wedding in the summer that will make Ron and I related by 2 or 3 marriages somehow. But there are a lot of those connections in our community. But I also want to recognize that 1/3 of the people who live in town have moved here in the last 5 years. The town of Cumberland has doubled in my lifetime. The population of the town of Cumberland has doubled in my lifetime. We have some significant growing pains and challenges ahead of us. It was very tempted, given the climate, the social climate over the last year, to think about not running. Who wants to be yelled at in an email? I had someone emailed us last week in capital letters, "Do your job," with lots of exclamation points. And we do our job, and we try to do our job thoughtfully, and we try to do our jobs within the confines of the law. And we are a very grateful community. I want to thank all the people who are on our boards. I actually was looking at the history of the town of Cumberland, and the last chapter is Cumberland Today, but that was Cumberland Today in 1974. And we had over 60 volunteers on several boards. We have over 100 volunteers on over a dozen committees helping run our community. And so I actually am going to go over my time a little bit with a quote. My goal is the same as it was for the town council in 1976. And this is a quote from Mary Louise Smith. She was a selectwoman and became a town councilor. And she was a role model for me for town government. And in her chapter, she wrote, our goals are to maintain what we have, to have well-planned growth with aesthetic beauty that was part of Cumberland always, to have each and every citizen of Cumberland, young and old, have the spirit given to us by our predecessors to pass on to future generations. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Shirley. That concludes our forum this evening. I'll thank those of you who joined us in person. It was lovely to see some faces in a gathering for once, for a change. And to those of you who have been watching this remotely, thank you for taking the time to do that. And thank you all again, the candidates, for your thoughtful participation this evening. Good night.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Good night.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you, Chris.
Oh yeah, thank you to our dutiful timekeeper.
Too, Chris.
2 minutes is not enough.
It's not at all.
No.
I know, it's hard. Then, the awkward silence of 3 minutes when people have extra
you.
time.